All right, I do think I will kick us off right now. People are, looks like participants are still logging in, but I'll occupy a little bit of that time to start off with. And then if anybody has any questions for me, I can address those individually if you're interested in about the programming that we do here at the Weeks Bay Reserve through the Coastal Training Program and in partnership with the Baldwin County Soil and Water Conservation District. So just to get us going, my name is Mike Shelton. I am the training program coordinator at the Weeks Bay Reserve. And who is the Weeks Bay Reserve, you might ask? Well, we're part of a state-federal partnership with our state partner being the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources State Lands Division Coastal Section, and the NOAA's office. The federal partner is NOAA's Office for Coastal Management, and the reserves, Weeks Bay Reserve is part of a 30 reserve system throughout the coastal U.S., including Puerto Rico and Hawaii, and even in a place where where there's no salt water, but there's still estuarine-like behaviors at Superior and on Lake Erie. So that is us. So the coastal training program gets its name by, as it sounds, we do training on coastal issues that are identified by what we like to call coastal decision makers. And so what we do is we work with partners here on the Alabama and Northern Gulf Coast to identify training and conduct that training, science-based, try to get that information to people that need it, and so that better decisions can be made on how we manage our coastal resources. So I do want to thank the Laura Smith and the Baldwin County Soil and Water Conservation District for being a longtime partner with us on with the reserve and with the department on conducting our programming. Laura is, as well as in the district in the past, have been leaders in conservation and water quality protection and protecting our soils. And so we're really happy that we can continue this long-term partnership. So what this series of workshops that we're doing, and in particular today's workshop, this was identified by people who have attended past workshops and people who participated in our needs assessments. And so we're meeting the needs of our local community professionals who are wanting to know about ways to reduce erosion as well as to control for sediment transport. So these courses are designed to do that. I know Barry and Mike have learning objective, a slide for learning objectives identified in their slide, so I'll let them handle that. And so if you are interested in providing topics for training, you will have an opportunity to do that. You can do that anytime during the chat on this program, or you can do it on the evaluation, which we will post. We will post a link to the evaluation at the end of this program. So thank you to Laura, and thank you to Barry and Mike for helping design and put on this program here. And so I'll transfer it over to Barry.
All right, thank you. Yep, make sure I'm not muted. Thank you, Mike, and also thank you, Laura, for having Mike Perez and I on to be a part of this this workshop series. And good morning to everyone out there. First, thank you for choosing to get better at managing stormwater. Helping good people to get better at managing stormwater is something that I really enjoy doing, and so I appreciate you trusting your your time with us. I appreciate you investing yourself in this way. Again, I'm Barry. I lead an environment and infrastructure group for Volkert, based out of Mobile there. We're environmental planners, environmental designers, and environmental permitting and compliance professionals. I've been with Volkert since October of 2016 when I retired from the Alabama Department of Transportation. I worked there for 26 years and don't regret at all staying as long as I did, and honestly don't regret leaving when I did. It's been a good career so far, and I've enjoyed this particular element of it. I actually helped to develop ALDOT's construction stormwater program, and after I left ALDOT, I've been able to help other state DOTs with their stormwater programs. And so I've worked with the Nevada DOT and Oklahoma DOT and Ohio DOT, and currently working with the Nebraska DOT and other states here in the Southeast. And so you'll see a lot of DOT transportation environment photos in the presentation, but I don't want you to think that this is transportation specific. All of the principles and even the detailed information we give you today is it can be and has been applied successfully on all sorts of construction environments, of transportation and industrial and commercial and residential. My friend Mike Perez, who you'll meet here in just a little bit, he's been a partner of mine for several years now. I got to know Mike when I was with the Alabama DOT, and we started investing in stormwater related research back in the early 2000s, and Mike was a researcher at Auburn University, and so he and I have worked together with some of those state DOTs, Ohio, and currently working with Nebraska together, and we've also been involved in the work of the Alabama Erosion and Sediment Control Partnership, and that's, you may have seen, well, you see Earl Norton, and you may have seen his camouflage friend Perry Oaks there behind him earlier. Perry leads that partnership. Earl used to lead it. He's just a huge participant and contributor in it now. That's the group that brings you the Alabama Blue Book and the Alabama, the Clearwater, Alabama events. And so Mike and I are involved there. We're involved in the Alabama Stormwater Association and those associated activities. By the way, if you're not a member of the Alabama Stormwater Association, do a quick search for the Alabama Stormwater Association later, look through the website, check it out, and you can become a member for free. And we'll talk a little more about some of those events later. Mike and I also contribute to the International Erosion Control Association, and that's where we really get to enjoy spreading and enhancing the state of the practice for construction stormwater management, not just here in Alabama, but across the nation. And there'll be some other opportunities with IECA and the Alabama Stormwater Association coming up in June. There's an MS4 Stormwater Conference being held in Huntsville. It's going to be a live in-person event coming up in Huntsville in June. And if you need more information about that, can't find it on the internet, please let me know. So Mike and I we've shared the duties of developing the presentation content, the workshop content, and we'll be sharing the duties of delivery for this first vegetation management workshop. I'll carry more of the presentation load. Mike will help out and contribute along the way in certain parts, and then Mike will have a greater role in the three practices workshop, and then an even greater role in the sediment basin workshop as we dig into that next week. So Mike, if you would introduce yourself and maybe get us on through the pole EV slides.
Thanks, Barry, and thanks for the introduction, and then thank you for the opportunity to present with you today. Like Barry mentioned, I've been at Auburn University, and I recently rejoined Auburn. I first met Barry when I was a graduate student working at the Erosion and Sediment Control Testing Facility, And once I graduated with my PhD, I had the opportunity to go join Iowa State University, and I was on their faculty for a couple of years before being invited to come back to Auburn. So I'm glad to be back in Alabama, glad to be back in Auburn and teaching and working at the facility again. A couple of housekeeping items here. So we do have all of our slides available for download. You can get to those by following the link that's on the slide here, that bit.ly/BCSWCD. If you go on that site, we're going to be posting all of our slides for today and for our other 2 workshops. So please visit that and download those slides if you're interested in them. For those of you that are watching together, that's perfectly fine. It might be a good idea if you type in the chat who's all in the room with you so that we can keep track of attendance. Now, the majority of the attendance and the participation, we're going to be taking that and tracking that through this platform called Poll EV. And so I'm going to pull up our previous slide here, but if you haven't had a chance, to register, you do need to create an account. An account is free, but this allows us to track your name, track who you are, and your participation throughout the workshop. So we'll be asking interactive poll questions, multiple choice, true, false, just to kind of see who's participating and get your thoughts and ideas. And the cool thing is we'll be able to share all of these responses during the workshop. So go ahead and register if you haven't done so. You can scan that QR code or you can follow that URL. And then if you're asked for an access code, the access code is Michael Perez 747. So when it comes to participating with Poll EV, there's a couple of different options. You can open a separate browser window on your computer and do it that way. You can have the Zoom on one side and have the Poll EV on another side. Or what might be easier is if you use your cell phone. So if you've got a browser on your phone, you can go to pollev.com and participate that way. And so to get us warmed up with Poll EV, we do have a poll question posted here, and I'm seeing on my screen that many of you have already responded to it. But this is to get us warmed up. Just go ahead and post where you're located or where you're joining us from, and it should pop up here on this map if we get it to show up. Barry, you might have to do this on your screen, but if you scroll the top right corner, there should be some options and might be able to see it come live.
I'm not seeing anything at the upper right. Would it be on the? Sorry, I'm not seeing that, Mike.
That's all right. How about if I share my screen real quick and we'll try that.
Do I need to stop share?
There we go. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm seeing that we've got a lot of responses, a lot of folks down in Baldwin, Mobile County area, as expected. So great. It looks like the majority of you are able to respond, and it is working the way we intend. So that's good.
Okay, could you allow screen sharing again, Mike, and I will hop back on.
Yeah. You should be able to now, Barry.
All right, so that's we're back to Mike's map, and then a yellow slide, and then our learning objectives.
All right, so We do have another poll question that I went ahead and posted. You should be seeing that on your phone or on the browser. And this question is, what is the most effective way to limit erosion on a construction site? So you have a few options. You have vegetative establishment, sediment control, and then limitation and delay of disturbance. And so I can see a lot of you have already responded or starting to respond. And most of you, 71%, are saying that limitation and delay of soil disturbance is the best approach. And we've got in second place, vegetation establishment, coming in at about 20–25% right now. So that's great. You all are on the right track, and that's the objective of our workshop today. It's to focus on vegetation, focus on limitation and delaying our soil disturbance. And so we've got 3 key learning objectives that we want to accomplish by the end of today's workshop. And so by the end of the workshop, you should be able to explain the function and the role of vegetation within a comprehensive stormwater management plan. You should be able to describe the state of practice for minimizing soil disturbance and preserving and establishing vegetation on construction sites. And finally, be able to apply the learned principles and processes to design project phasing, vegetative preservation, and establishment and topsoil management for maximum effectiveness. So with that, I'm going to hand it over back to Barry, and he's going to kick us off.
All right. So if you've attended many of my training events or efforts, you know that I always like to start with the why before I get into the what and the how of what we're learning about. I used to tell folks at ALDOT that they really don't have to care about the environment. They just have to act like they care about the environment for my purposes. And that approach does work for some people and some children, I guess, but it's helpful also to know why we're doing what we're doing, or to understand better the background or the impacts of what happens if we don't do what we ought to be doing. And I like to sum those up, and have often broken those down in this way. This is why we care: because of the land, because of the water, because of the law. We see that political swings, they kind of go left and right as far as how much we care in a regulatory sense. And yes, there is a political pendulum, but I think the base of that pendulum is always moving toward a higher level of quality of land, water, and air, and therefore our regulations are continually evolving and oftentimes becoming more stringent in those areas. And we know that vegetation management plays a critical role in protecting land, protecting water, and complying with laws as we do our work. U.S. topsoil doesn't regenerate itself very quickly or very easily, and you see the statistic there that our topsoil is being lost at a rate of 17 times the rate that it's being created. That's startling, because we know the importance of topsoil. We'll talk more about that, and you can see some of the activities that might cause that topsoil to be lost and the estimated rates of those losses along with it. And you see construction, which is mainly what we'll be talking about today, 35 to 45 tons per acre per year, which is a pretty tremendous amount of sediment loss, or a huge rate. But we can reduce that. We can oftentimes reduce that by 90% or 99%, and we'll get into that here in just a little while. We have a congressional representative from Alabama that once blamed sea level rise on erosion, dirt and rocks falling into the sea, and while he's way off on his thinking there, if he happened to have been looking at these numbers before he made those statements, you might see why he could have thought that. I think the logic is behind it. It's just wrong. But you can see 80 million tons per year of construction generated sediment washes into our waterways. $13 billion is spent annually to mitigate erosion, and 4.9 million trucks of sediment. That's what 80 million tons represents. And so while that erosion and resulting sediment loss really has no effect on sea level rise, it can have a tremendous effect on our waterways and the creatures and habitats that are within those waterways. Now, these are two photos from the same bridge location over the Cahaba River, and the Cahaba, it's located in central Alabama and has a greater aquatic diversity than any other river of its size in the United States. Maybe in North America, there are some species in the Cahaba River that exist nowhere else on the planet, and those species and their habitat are negatively impacted by siltation and sediment loads. And this picture on the right, that happens just about with every rain event, and it's not necessarily from construction related erosion. There are other factors there, but it does have an impact on those species and their habitat. And while that's a central Alabama stream, we know that we also have some issues down in coastal Alabama. We know that we like to blame the pollutants in Mobile Bay sometimes on the greater watershed and what's coming from places and people further inland, but we know we have issues there on the coast also. The project mentioned in the newspaper there on the left, I was a part of that project, and that's a photo of Big Creek Lake. That's the drinking water supply for 1/3 of a million people there in the Mobile area, and we know that a lack of proper vegetation management led to that ugly photo and the drama that surrounded that project over time. So getting to the law now, the law of the land, the law of our nation is really the basis for the law is the Clean Water Act, and we're getting close to the 50-year anniversary of the passage of the Clean Water Act, and we haven't quite met the purpose for that act. You know, the purpose to restore and maintain chemical, physical, and biological integrity of our nation's waters. We're barely getting the protection part down now. We haven't done the restoration part, and you can see the goals of the Clean Water Act to eliminate pollutants by 1985, to restore our waters to fishable and swimmable by 1983. We missed the mark. You know, that Big Creek Lake, that drinking water supply that I just showed you, if you go fishing in Big Creek Lake, you're going to pass at least one sign that says, hey, don't eat the fish out of this place. Because of historic and past pollutants into the water supply, mercury and other pollutants. If you're going to eat come close to restoring our waters to a condition that we were hoping for back in 1972. Now we have Alabama laws here, and we actually have a new construction general permit for stormwater discharges related to construction activities. That permit becomes effective April 1st, I believe. If you haven't signed up for it, there's a Alabama Stormwater Association meeting this afternoon where ADM will go over the new construction general permit. So I hope you've already signed up for that. If you haven't, there will be a recording of that event on the Alabama Stormwater Association website in the near future. But looking at some of the vegetation related
Hey, Barry, we lost your audio.
your work and waters of the U.S. or waters of the state. Number 16 there recognizes some of the benefits of vegetation and asks us to direct runoff to vegetated areas to increase sediment removal and infiltration of those waters. Under C there, it talks about soil stabilization. and tells us to implement and maintain stabilization measures such as seeding protected by erosion controls until vegetation is established, sodding, mulching, erosion control blankets, hydro mulch, gravel. We'll talk about all of those today. Continuing under that soil stabilization section, it requires temporary stabilization if an area will remain unstable for more than 13 days. That's not saying wait 13 days before you stabilize. That's the maximum. If you know an area is going to be disturbed and left for more than 2 weeks, stabilize it now. Stabilize it when you decide to leave it for a while. Let's cover it up as a part of our getting out of that area. Let's cover it up now, at least with some temporary stabilization. There's really not a reason not to, but it requires some planning on your part. And then once grading is completed in an area, let's cover it up with final stabilization right now. We can't wait till the end of the job. That's the old way of doing things, was you clear a project, you build the project, and then you come back in and stabilize the project once everything's completed. That's what led to the problems on US 98 above Big Creek Lake, is 200 acres worth of disturbance and a contractor waiting till the end of the job to try to stabilize that site. And we'll talk more about the concept of continuous pursuit of stabilization a little bit later. And this number 4, 8M, is defining the word immediately. So they say the requirement to initiate stabilization immediately. Well, that means as soon as practicable. And practicable is not just a hard word to say. It's a regulatory term that means as soon as possible, as soon as feasible, as soon as, or as realistic to do so, but no later than the next day, according to this language here. And that also, again, takes some planning on your part. The Alabama handbook is referenced in number 5 there. The big title for that handbook is the Alabama Handbook for Erosion Control, Sediment Control, and Stormwater Management on Construction Sites in Urban Areas. That's a mouthful. And so over the years, we shortened that to the handbook, or the Alabama Handbook. Today and into the future, we're trying to rebrand the title of that handbook and just simply call it the Blue Book. And so today, the current version of the field guide and the design and operational manuals, they're in blue binders or have blue covers. And so you'll hear us talk about the Blue Book, but also might hear us talk about the handbook also. It's the same thing. So the regulatory definition of final stabilization, it's a big, long definition there in the general permit. Some technical elements that we need to take note of. One, permanent ground cover does not necessarily have to be vegetation. It could be a sidewalk. It could be a parking lot. It could be the building that you sit on that disturbed area that hopefully from now on evermore will prevent erosion from leaving that particular area. So once you get the foundation for it, or maybe even the aggregate underneath the foundation of that building, you could probably go ahead and count that as permanently stabilized once you get that building started. Same way with building a roadway. Once you don't have to necessarily get to asphalt or a traffic stripe before you can call it permanently stabilized. It may be when you get your describes, we're looking for perennial vegetation, and perennial means that the plant itself doesn't die with the season. It means that the plant lives on. It may go dormant for a season, but it comes back next year. And so a plant that doesn't live from now on, that would be called an annual plant. So we're looking for perennial vegetation as a part of our final stabilization and permanent cover. We're looking for a 100% coverage at an 85% density. And so what that means is we have made an attempt to establish cover on every square yard, square foot of our site and especially right after construction, then we may not have that full 100% coverage. We may not ever have 100% coverage, but we need to at least get to an 85% coverage, and we can measure that. I've never had to. Most of the time you can look at a site and tell whether or not it needs additional work as far as stabilization, but in the ALDOT specifications, I actually created a specification to measure that 85% density that's required. If you're interested in that, you can look it up or get with me and I'll help you. So as a reminder, this virtual short course series, it's sponsored with an intended audience of coastal stormwater professionals, and with you guys and Mobile and Baldwin counties being special in a number of ways, you also have some additional stormwater related requirements in regulation. And so there's the Coastal Zone Act reauthorization amendments of 1990 that have been in place for 30 years that require the development of a coastal non-point pollution control program management plan. And that management plan has been in place for a while. It's been updated along the way. It's still in place today. And a change to the new regulations, new construction general permit, is that the requirements of that management plan have now been, I guess, highlighted and reinforced with the general permit. And so we're not going to get into all of the details associated with those enhanced or increased requirements associated with Mobile and Baldwin counties, but I would encourage you to take a look at that new permit and just make sure you're comfortable with those changes related to your counties. And again, if you happen to have already registered, there'll be information today coming from ADEM as part of the Stormwater Association event this afternoon. All right, let's get into vegetation. Let's talk about how vegetation does in fact play a critical role in how well we protect the land, the water, and keep ourselves in compliance with the law. That regulatory emphasis is there with good reason. Vegetation influences runoff, it influences erosion, it influences sediment loss, and we know that our world of construction stormwater, there's so many variables that can sink us that are way beyond soils.
Hey, Barry.
And yes, sir.
Your audio has been cutting out for about 5-10 seconds at a time, so you may want to repeat the last 10 seconds there.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I'm not sure what to do about that, honestly.
It's working. It's working fine most of the time. It's just been a couple of.
Okay, well, keep reminding me if you think I've said something important. Remind me. Yeah. So or vegetation influences runoff, erosion, influences sediment loss, and well, I think maybe what you had missed is there's so many things that can sink us in the world of construction stormwater. The amount of rain, the frequency of rain, the type of rainfall we get, we don't get to control those things. We don't control the types of soils and the amount of area we have to work in, and vegetation can help us with all of those things. It absorbs the energy of a raindrop, which hits the ground at about 19 miles per hour. Vegetation can kind of attenuate that impact. It binds soil particles, it slows the velocity of runoff, increases the ability of soil to absorb water. It also helps to hang on to water and then evapotranspirate some of that water, which reduces the amount of runoff. And it also not just, it protects and helps with the detachment of soil particles due to water, but it also helps with dust management or the detachment of soil particles due to wind, as we start to see some dusty projects this time of year and on into the summer. So vegetation, I mentioned vegetation slows water. Slowing water is a really good thing. And we know that just by reducing the velocity of our runoff, we can reduce erosive energy, we can reduce the the size of the particle that's being transported, and we can also reduce the overall mass of the sediment that's being transported. We can increase the time of concentration which is slowing water. We can do that through the use of vegetation. And so if we can't keep all that dirty water that's trying to leave our site, if we can just at least slow it down some, we can get some pretty good benefits just by running it through some vegetation to slow it down. As we're trying to model the rates and velocities and volumes of runoff from a particular area, we can also see the benefits of vegetation. The runoff coefficient C there in the rational method, it relates to the amount of runoff of precipitation received, and it changes with vegetative cover. It's a larger value for areas with low infiltration and a high value in areas of, lower for permeable and well-vegetated areas. So as C goes down, so does Q, which is the rate of runoff. Similarly, the runoff curve number in the SCS curve number method, it's also dependent on vegetative cover. If we look at this table of curve numbers over there on the right, we can see that they're definitely affected and influenced by the hydrologic soil group, the hydrologic condition also, but the type of cover and is also a part of that. If we look for the smallest number, remember if with SES, the smaller the number, then the lower the rate of runoff. So if we can get the number down, then we're better off. So if you look for the smallest number, it's 39. If you look at the type of cover and hydrologic condition that creates that 39, it's in an open space, lawns, parks, golf courses, with a grass cover of 75% in good condition. And so that number gets bigger as the condition degrades or the coverage starts to become less. Also as we start to model the amount of sediment that might be leaving our site, whether we're doing that on an annual basis with the revised universal soil loss equation or Russell, or doing it for a particular storm event with the modified universal soil loss equation or muscle, the C cover management factor, it applies in both, and it plays a really big role in judging the amount of average annual soil loss with Russell or the total loss from a specific rain event from muscle. And so C starts with a 1.0 for bare land, and it goes down from there depending on the type of cover you put out there. So as C goes down, then the product, the amount of sediment that's leaving your site, that also goes down. And so just a comparison there, you can see the 1.0 for fallow or bare ground. And then if we'll just simply put some ryegrass out there, if we'll get a good stand of temporary ryegrass, we can reduce the amount of sediment that's leaving that slope. With all the other factors left the same, we can reduce it by 90%. If we can get a permanent stand of vegetation out there, or if we can lay sod on that slope, we can reduce the amount of sediment that's trying to leave that slope by 99%. That's huge. You compare your site to your neighbor's site, and they're not worrying about establishing vegetation. You've already got your sod laid on the slope. Your site, all other things being equal, your site is losing 99% less sediment than their site is. So Mike went over our objectives for today, and one of those objectives was to explain the function and role of vegetation within a comprehensive stormwater management plan. And so Mike Shelton earlier mentioned that the topics of these three workshops, those were thoughtfully put forward and kind of judged and contributed to by professionals in that area. But we have to remember that it's not all about managing sediment, and it's not even all about managing erosion. that those two areas of stormwater management are really a part of a bigger, more holistic and comprehensive stormwater management plan. So let's look at what that might appear. We've got these 5 areas that we'll talk about. We call these the 5 pillars of construction stormwater management. And they were developed and evolved over a period of years of pain and misery when I was at AlDOT back in the 2004 time period, over a couple of years surrounding that. And it started with a focus on what we thought was the problem, but turned out to be a symptom of the problem. And so we saw our sediment in the creek, our sediment in the pond, our sediment in our neighbor's yard or in the church parking lot. And so we went out to unless we're also taking care of some other issues.
Barry, we lost you when you started talking about managing sediment there on this slide.
Thank you. So we started out focusing on the symptom rather than the source of the problem, and so we were looking at sediment in the creeks and the ponds, neighbors' property, and realized that if that's all we're focused on, we'll never win. And so we started looking at where that sediment was coming from. And we realized that if we could keep the soil particle up here on the slope from becoming detached, we don't have to work so hard down here to try to capture that soil particle. And so I've working with other programs across the nation, I've noticed that a lot of programs stop there. You know, we call ourselves cultured. Once we figure out that managing erosion is more effective than managing sediment, we kind of stop, but we never look further or deeper into what's causing that erosion to take place. And in Alabama, most of the time, it's water. And so we can tackle water by at least limiting the amount of work we have to do to those raindrops that fall on our project. So we can take the water that's coming to our project to prevent the raindrop impact, to prevent the sheet erosion, and then manage the sediment that might come along with that. And then somewhere along the way, we realized that our contractors are way smarter than we were giving them credit for being. They're smart, they're innovative, and they're also, believe it or not, they are willing to do just about anything we ask them to do, as long as we tell them up front as they're putting their bids together, and we're willing to pay for it, which we are. They can do just about anything we ask them to do, but we have to ask them. We have to tell them. In many cases, we have to say, this is how we want you to do this work. And so managing communication was kind of the last thing that evolved of these 5 pillars. It's now the most obvious, but if we're not managing communication, it's going to be very difficult to be successful in these other areas. And so we call communication the best management practice we have available to us. And so we start there and work our way down. And it so happens that that managing communication is the most effective practice we have available to us. And when it comes down to it, if you're not doing the other 4 pillars, managing sediment actually becomes one of the least effective practices we have available. And it's also the most expensive if you're not managing the other 4 pillars along the way. And so we encourage you to adopt all 5 of these pillars and work them in order to increase the effectiveness of your managing sediment practices, and also to reduce the cost of trying to manage that sediment. So in terms of managing erosion, with communication, we know that specifications, plan notes, pre-bid, pre-construction meetings, all of those can provide direction, they can provide clarity, they can share with the contractor what our priorities and expectations are for this project before they ever put their bid together for the project. Managing work, the timing of vegetation is critical, and it's a part of managing the work of a project. When we choose to clear and when we choose to cover, those decisions do make a difference. And so we should choose to limit and delay our disturbance at every opportunity. We have to communicate that to our contractor through our plan notes and meetings and conversations. And then as we get to managing water, we know that vegetation slows water down, and slowed water is good water, right? Erosion, we just saw that vegetation can give us a 99% reduction in sediment yield just by establishing that permanent cover. And then even the general permit acknowledges that the sediment, that vegetation can provide sediment filtering and sediment capture. And we absolutely need sediment management as a part of our plan, but that part of our plan, the work of that plan, can be lessened if we're managing vegetation along the way. So Mike asked you this question earlier. Let's see how we do this time. Mike, I'm gonna stop the share and let you ask the question and show the results.
Sure. So you should be seeing this on your poll EV. If you don't see the question, go ahead and refresh the page. It should be showing now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen so we can see the responses coming in. All right, so the question is, what is the most effective practice shown on the screen? Is it topsoil application, vegetative establishment, limitation, delay of soil disturbance, or the rolled erosion control product that's installed? And so here you can see the results coming in from the poll, and you see the majority of you, about 65%, are agreeing it's the vegetation establishment. But Barry, I would argue that it might be the delay in soil disturbance and the limitation in the disturbance.
Yeah, I was watching to see if, after you said that, if the numbers would start going up for limitation. Let me get back on here and kind of explain that question a little bit further. So looking at this photo, and this photo was taken on the Anniston East Bypass project on ALDOT several years ago. And so ALDOT has some requirements for establishing vegetation as the work is being carried forward. So as a contractor cuts 20 feet into a cut, they have to start establishing permanent vegetation. Then 20 more feet have to do the same thing. And so where I'm standing taking this photo, we still haven't reached the subgrade of the roadway, but you can see we already have green grass growing. And so if we look at the Russell equation there, we can learn a lot just from the units of the soil loss equation. So the product there is the annual sediment yield, and that's the result comes out in tons per acre per year. So if we, and really what that's representing is massive sediment per area of disturbance per duration of disturbance. And so can we reduce the area of disturbance? Yes, we can. Can we reduce the duration of disturbance? Yes, we can. And so if we can reduce those two things, or even one of those two things, we can make the massive sediment that's trying to leave our project, we can make that go down also. And so what ALDOT has done here is they've limited the area of disturbance by telling the contractor, hey, don't clear until you have to. And then they've limited the duration of disturbance by saying, hey, even before you get to the bottom of this cut, we want you establishing vegetation. And so we're getting to we're at the 90% reduction in sediment load for the top 20 feet of this cut already before we even get to the bottom of it. So So the answer to the question was the most effective management practice shown in this photo is limiting and delaying disturbance. But good call. It would have been an obvious answer to say vegetation, since this is a vegetation management class. So let's talk more about preserving vegetation. So if we're getting 99% reduction from established permanent vegetation, what are we getting from but it's about how the contractor stages their work. So this project is in West Mobile County, and you can see, well, what you can't see behind me, and I'm standing on top of a hydroseeder in this this photo, but what's behind me is completed roadway, permanent vegetation, asphalt for, say, the 1.5 miles leading up to this project. We have another 7,500 feet to go to get to the west end of this project. And you can see right here under me, we have some solid sod in the ditch line. We have some seeded and mulched area on the front slopes and back slopes. We have an area where the contractor's clearing. Well, actually, they're not clearing. They've cleared all that we're allowing them to clear. And so they're hauling that material off and doing some excavation in this area. But we still have a long way to go, and there are a lot of trees there behind the at the top of the photo. So we've limited, well, we've delayed disturbance in that area beyond the trees, and we've limited the area of disturbance here where we're working right now. And so of this, I don't know, 15,000, 16,000 foot long project, we only have this small area of disturbance out there, and that reduces the sediment load greatly. So not all areas of our plan, of our site need to be cleared. Now this is a roadway site. We'll look at a commercial or a residential development in just a second, but you can see the area between our construction limits and the right of way. Is there a reason to clear that? You know, maybe if there are utilities there, if we have to install a fence or something like that, maybe there's a reason to clear it. But I think oftentimes we just simply clear from right of way to right of way or property line to property line just because that's what we do sometimes. But no, every square foot or half acre of established vegetation you save, that's sediment loss that you also save down the road. So take a look at this residential development. It's pretty clear that just about all area within the property has been cleared. I mean, there's some trees and vegetation preserved there along the waterway there on the right side. But we thought for some reason that the purchasers of houses in this development, which is in a fairly flat area, we thought they'd like it better without trees. Well, I think your real estate agent might disagree with that, but sometimes the vegetation just simply gets in our way. It's inconvenient. And you know, this is another roadway project I'm a part of, and you can see we've got the jug handle roadway access road coming in from the top, and then you've got the main line there on the bottom. Well, what do we do in that area between those two roadways? There's no need to clear that, no need to strip that whatsoever. But if we just leave it as is, we know what's going to happen. And Eric Gautreaux is on the call, and I've talked to him about, hey, can we go ahead and remove this silt fence here? We've got our bridge construction on the right side. We've got an access road there going down the middle. And then we've got the preserved area there in the middle. And really the silt fence there to the very left, it actually is performing what it's supposed to do. The other, I talked to Eric about, let's just take it up. And Eric said, well, you know where these goofballs are going to park next week if we take that silt fence up. They're going to be out in that preserved vegetation, parking their vehicles, doing donuts, whatever it might be. And so we made the decision to leave that silt fence up just to protect our vegetation. There's a shot that I really like. Behind me is the source of soil for this embankment that's being constructed. In front of me, the contractor had a 17-acre limitation on the area of disturbance, and so he cut him a road through the woods to get from his cut section to his fill section, and limited his disturbance, but also delayed the disturbance of that treed area on either side of the access road there. There's some minimal clearing in a bridge construction site. Just get so many feet outside of the bridge overhangs, and then let that be it. There's no need to clear from right of way to right of way. And so back to communicating, we have to let our contractors know that we don't want them to clear in a certain area. And sometimes that takes some signage, and sometimes it takes a physical barrier. I was on a project in Texas last year, and noticed that they were doing a really good job of protecting the bark on the tree, but you can see the root systems are just completely being dug into there. And I think these are some type of oak trees. I can't imagine them being okay with that type of damage. And so I think typically we can think about preserving the roots within the drip line of a tree. And if we can't do that, that tree may not make it. And so some other factors that we need to be thinking about, even if we've preserved this tree and we're not going to excavate around it, again, we start parking up in there, and we start storing materials, and before you know it, that tree has been damaged, or at least the root system or the soil around it has been compacted, and we have issues. Sediment deposition is another problem as it starts to build up above the roots and up on the tree trunk. So one thing I have been fooled before with contractors saying, hey, we're not going to clear that area. We're just going to go in and log it. We just want to go in and harvest the timber, and Barry, that's a pretty clean operation. Well, it's not. And loggers can make a really big mess of a site, and what you're left with there is a commitment maybe that you've made to a regulator, or you've made to some other stakeholder, and now you're left with this truly disturbed site. Now it's not as disturbed as had they gone in there and cleared and grubbed it traditionally, but there's still a problem there, and we'll see ruts and a lot of exposed dirt with a timber harvesting operation. There are some practices that we can employ, but trust me, those loggers, they can wait. Their operations are pretty mobile these days, and they can mobilize pretty easily, pretty quickly, even though they'll tell you they can't do a second operation. They can. So let's, we had budgeted in a 5-minute break into the class, and we're about halfway through there in time and content. And I do want to leave some time at the end for questions and answers and discussion. But let's take a 5-minute break. Do with that break whatever you want to do, and I'll catch my breath, and we'll show back up at 5 minutes after 10. Mike Perez, do you have anything to add before we do that?
No, I think we're at a good spot.
Okay, great. All right, see you guys at 5 minutes after 10 o'clock. Hey. Okay, everyone, if you will, find your seats. I'm kidding, you can stand up if you want to. So I have restarted Zoom, and Mike and I discussed a little bit. I've turned off my ceiling fan to see if that was causing an issue, and I don't know exactly what's causing the audio breakup, but Mike and I are going to continue. He's going to let me know when I break up for long periods, and I'll try to restart as best I can. I apologize for that audio glitch. You'd think at this point in COVID and Zoom world, we would be better at this than we are, but we simply aren't. So it'll be good to get back in person and get going. So I just pulled up the chat box, and I guess when I restarted Zoom, all the chat cleared out. So I want to ask really quickly, Mike Perez or Mike Shelton or anyone else, do you have any questions about what we've talked about so far, or any points we need to make? And everyone, if you want to type in a question or make a comment, please feel free to do that right now.
Yeah, this is Mike Shelton. We don't have any questions as of right now, but we'll keep you posted if there's some that comes up between now and the end of your part of the presentation.
Okay, great, Mike. Thank you. Okay, well, let's get going again. And you may be thinking, okay, we're an hour into this presentation. We haven't talked about how to plant grass yet. And you would be right that it has taken us quite a while to get to vegetation establishment. And part of the reason for that is I think it's so important that we see vegetation management as a part of a bigger plan to manage stormwater on our projects. And while established vegetation may be extremely effective at helping us to keep sediment on our projects, so is preserving vegetation. So I wanted to get those, really emphasize those two things as we went along. And so now you farmers and folks who are ready to hear about fertilizer and pure live seed and that kind of stuff, now we're about to get cranked up. So let's talk about some, I guess, an ideal construction sequence from my experience and my perspective and point of view. As you're getting ready to start your project, don't clear until you've, I tell our contractors, I don't want to see a tree fall. I don't want to see a chainsaw before I also see some bulldozers and excavators on site. So I don't want you clearing until you're ready to start grading. And contractor, once you start grading, I don't want you to stop until you get to subgrade or get to the grade where we're supposed to be. Don't go grade a little bit down there, build half the field, then go down there and build half the field, build a culvert over here, and install pipe over there. I want you to start grading in one area, get to finish grade, and then let's stabilize it. And so we actually put language in our contracts and in our plan notes to for the continuous pursuit of permanent stabilization. And that kind of language is kind of hard to argue with. You know, you asked your contractor, are we today, is this activity pursuing permanent stabilization? That's what we're after, contractor. And again, permanent stabilization may be getting the building pad ready, or it may be getting the driveway poured, or it may be putting in the asphalt for the roadway. So just some principles that we keep in mind as we get to establishing vegetation, and again, a continuous pursuit of permanent stabilization means we cover it up today as quickly as we can. And I like this photo here where our contractor chose on their own. We've got a pond on the left side of the photo, just beyond the boundary, and a pretty sensitive creek. It's Seaberry Creek there in West Mobile County, and our contractor and our inspector had some influence on that. But they decided, let's go ahead and get this ditch graded, get our sediment controls in place, and let's cover up at least this buffer between us and that creek. And then we'll finish excavating on the right side of the road a little bit later as we give ourselves some cushion between ourselves and disaster. So some considerations, some questions that we need to be asking ourselves during the planning and the design process, and then also questions along the way we need to be asking. So what's the desired permanent species? You know, again, we're looking for that perennial plant. Do we need a nurse crop? Do we need a cover crop? And we'll talk about those terms a little bit later. And so when is the best time to plant? Can we schedule our project to fit planting schedules? Sometimes that's not reasonable. When I'm up north, they talk about the winter season or the rainy season, and they'll actually shut contractors and shut construction down during those times. We don't do that here in Alabama. We don't have a rainy season or a season that we really can't work. We work year round and we deal with the elements we deal with. So we have to know. So I'm working today at the end of March. Which species can I seek to establish right now? Or if I'm in August, which species do I need to be looking at establishing at that point? Are our soils suitable? You know, have we done some testing to see if our soils will actually maintain? We can get grass to grow just about anywhere in Alabama, but it may not last very long if our soils aren't suitable. Long-term stand of vegetation.
Hey, Barry, lost you when you got into speaking about establishing vegetation throughout the various seasons of the year.
Okay, so we also have to ask, are our soils suitable? Have we done the testing to make sure that we're able to establish a long-term stand of grass? We can get a plant growing just about any time of year or anywhere in Alabama, just because of our climate and our soils. But getting that plant to stay there for very long through the next drought, through the hot period, those are challenges, and we need to get our soil right before we do that. And then also ask ourselves, what's the best method for establishing that? And we'll talk about some of those methods of establishment in a little bit. Like I said, in Alabama, we have pretty good climate. We have pretty good soils. Topography can be a challenge. Heavy rain can be a challenge. Sometimes periods of drought can be a challenge. But on average, we have some pretty good conditions for growing grass. And so with climate, we think about average temperature and rainfall. With long-term land use, we're thinking about the appearance. Is this a front lawn of a Taco Bell, or is it in front lawn of my house, or is it 300 feet off the roadway? What kind of traffic is going to be on this slope? Are we just going to be mowing it, or is there going to be foot traffic? How often are we going to mow it? Do we want to? Do we need to maintain a certain height of vegetation, say in a solar facility, large scale utility scale solar facility, that will influence the type of vegetation we try to establish, and then our soils and topography. You know, if we're dealing in sandy soils, we may not want a clumping type of vegetation. Maybe we need more of a creeping vegetation, so we're not creating channels for the runoff to go through and carry that sand. All of those things come into play, but the good news is we don't have to make all those assessments ourselves. There's some really good resources out there. I mentioned the Blue Book earlier. There's some really good information about vegetation establishment in the Blue Book, including these tables for selecting species at certain types of the years, certain time of the year, man. So we got common species of plants there. I guess you could add to these St. Augustine and centipede and zoysia down in your areas. But those aren't often established by seeding. I tried to establish centipede once by seeding and went back to sod pretty quickly. Notice that there's a north, central, and south column over there on the right side. You're obviously in the south part of this table. And so there's not just a region, there's also a planting date as a part of this, and then the rate of seeding goes along with the species and plant selection also. So one thing to note, if you look at Bermuda grass there, it can be established just about any time of year by solid sod. Bermuda grass by seeding, February through September. You know, there's some species like tall fescue, you could probably establish it in your area right now if you planted it, but it wouldn't last there very long. Also notice that there's some gaps in here. We got March to July 15th. And, you know, so what do you do if you want common Bermuda grass planted and you're at August 31st, what do you do? Well, you're going to have to establish some type of nurse crop to help hold the world together until we can get around to a decent season. So we mentioned appearance, traffic, maintenance. Within limits, we pretty much get to decide what species we're going to see on our site in the future. Again, there are some species that don't work in North Alabama and some species that don't work very well in South Alabama, and these tables can help us out with those. So thinking about long-term land use, a park might need a different type of grass than a public park might need a different type of grass than what's in your yard, and that may be different than what's along a roadside. And that could be based on appearance, traffic type, volume, and the expectations for maintenance. At my last house, we had about 2.5 acres, and part of the yard was really shaded. And then my kids didn't run around in that part of the yard very much. So I planted centipede over there, where the rest of the yard I was able to plant and establish Bermuda grass. And so that worked out fine for me. I didn't have to mow the centipede as often, and the kids didn't tear up the Bermuda grass, but it was a little bit more expensive to do that in the shady areas. And so economics play a role in your plant selection also. And Mike will show us some cost information a little bit later. Another good resource for selecting plant species is the Alabama Department of Transportation specifications. You can do a quick search to get to the specifications, and then another quick search within the PDF spec book to get to vegetation establishment, or seeding, I guess is probably what it's called. And so with ALDOT, the state's broken into zones. Zone 3 would be your area, or the south zone in the blue book. ALDOT also breaks down their mowing, and keep in mind these tables are for establishing vegetation in a roadside environment. This isn't, it may or may not be applicable to what you want to put in your yard, but the information is good there. Just keep that in mind. One of the characteristics or areas of characteristic that ALDOT differentiates here are areas subject to frequent mowing and areas not subject to frequent mowing. And so they're talking about the area adjacent to the roadway. It's going to be mowed more often than the slope that's 100 or 200 feet off of the roadway. And so there's some different required permanent plant. You'll see at the bottom of those two tables, the required permanent plant for areas subject to frequent mowing. It's going to be Bermuda grass most of the time. There may be some areas that want to establish some Bahia grass, Pensacola Bahia grass, but most of the time it's going to be Bermuda grass in your area. And then for those areas not subject to frequent mowing, it's going to be a mixed species of vegetation there, and we'll see more I guess love grass and some taller type plantings in those areas not subject to frequent mowing. So you'll see also hulled and unhulled Bermuda grass. That wasn't always an obvious thing for me. When I thought about hulled Bermuda grass, I thought it was seed without hulls. I'm sorry, I thought it was seed with hulls, but that's once they've been hulled, the hull is taken off of the seed, then it becomes a hulled seed. And I probably just confused you more than ever there. Just know that that once the seed, I'm not even going to try again. Just know that there is a difference between hulled and unhulled, and unhulled has not been processed as much to get to the hulled part. And those hulled seeds they're smaller, so it takes more of it to meet your planting rate. So when is the best time to plant? It's right now, remember. And one thing I like about the ALDOT seed mixes is no matter where you are during the year, there is a seed mix that applies for that time of the year for your zone, except for if you're in this, say you're adjacent to the roadway, within 15 feet of the roadway, we really want Bermuda grass planted there. And so we will have to come back and seed and stubble. So we put out the ryegrass from September to February, and then we come back and seed and stubble with our permanent mix a little bit later there. All right, so let's talk about pure live seed. Now, a typical bag of seed or seed mix, it's not all seed. There's debris in there, there's dead seed, there's live seed of desirable or non-desirable species. So there may be some weed seed in there that you really don't want. And all of that has to be analyzed per the laws of the state of Alabama and just about every other state. It has to be analyzed, and then a seed ticket or a seed analysis be placed with that bag. So as your contractors are bringing bags of seed to your project, take a look at the seed tag and make sure you're getting what you're paying for there. And so when we're talking about pure live seed, those rates in the ALDOT table, for example, those are pure live seed. That's not, if I go to the store and buy a bag of mix, how much of that mix do I put out? It's how much pure live seed is in there. And so the way we calculate pure live seed is we take the bulk of the bag or the quantity in the truck, the hopper, and we multiply that times the percent purity and the percent germination. You'll see on the seed tag there that for this particular seed analysis, the seed was 98% pure in that bag. That means it was all of the seed that we were looking for. The germination percentage there is 96%. So of this bag, 98% is what you want, and 96% of that will actually grow. And so we multiply our bulk, our mass, pounds of seed in the mix or in the bag, times our percent purity, times our percent germination. And so I want you to do that really quickly, looking at this seed tag with a 98% purity and 96% germination. How much pure live seed is in a 50-pound bag? And I'm going to pause just a second while you do that calculation. It should be a quick calculation. It should have taken you longer to get your calculator than it was to do the calculation. But we know that we multiply the bulk, the pounds of seed in the bag, times our purity, times our germination, and we get 47 pounds. So these numbers, 98% and 96%, those are pretty good numbers. That's maybe as good as you can get. But when we start seeing those rates get down into the 80s, it can make a really big difference in how much money you spend. So if you're paying the same amount of money for this particular seed that's shown on the screen as you are a bag of seed with say 80% purity and 78% germination, then you're not getting what you paid for there. You have to do your calculations to make sure that your economy is working out. So we talked about nurse crops and cover crops earlier. Just clarified, nurse crops, they hold the world together while the permanent plants are being established. So we may need to supplement a mix. If we've got a slow growing plant, we may need to supplement that with something that's a little more fast growing, but will die out as the seasons change, as the temperature starts to get warmer. Those can also be knocked out with a herbicide sometimes. So you get the ryegrass going, you get the root system in there along with the other permanent species. Then you knock it down with a mower or knock it down with herbicide, and that allows the maximum amount of sunlight get to your permanent plant. Cover crop or temporary seeding, that's used in lieu of permanent planting. So in those seasons or in those situations where you either don't want to or can't establish a permanent plant, then you can put a temporary species out there or a cover crop or temporary seeding, again, just to hold the world together until you can get to that permanent. Why? Well, what kept us from getting to finished grade and getting the permanent vegetation started? And typically there is a good answer for that, but sometimes I'll catch and there's really not a good answer. Well, we just wanted to get it covered up, so we thought we'd put temporary seed on it. Well, let's take a couple more hours or one more day, and let's stabilize, get it to grade and stabilize it completely. So some exceptions to that rule, obviously, is material stockpiles where you really don't want to spend the extra money to permanently stabilize those, unless they're going to be left for a long time. Then you can temporarily seed those or use a cover crop. All right, so this is another table from the Blue Book. I just noticed that Perry gave us a comment. He said, also beware of seed testing dates. Germination decreases with time, especially when improperly stored. Thank you for that, Perry. Yeah, that's my kind of luck, is when they see me drive up in the parking lot, they go to the back of the warehouse to get my seed bags. But yeah, Perry's exactly right. Take a look at the testing dates on those seed. Make sure you're not getting old seed. Because he's right, germination rates do decline over time. Thank you, Perry, for that. So another table from the Blue Book here, and this is, these are, I guess, categorized or labeled as temporary seed. So these are the cover crops. In Alabama, I typically only see annual ryegrass and brown top millet being used as temporary cover. In my opinion, we see way too much brown top millet. It's cheap, it's easy, it grows really fast, it gets you a good green look really quickly, but then it seems to hog all the sunlight and the nutrients, and it really makes it tough to get the permanent seed to come up from underneath or after you've had the brown top millet out there. I was in Birmingham yesterday and saw a slope that probably 2 years ago, I saw brown top millet just covering the slope, and that slope today is still really struggling to get the permanent stand. We actually stopped including brown top millet in our seed mixes at Alabama about 10 years ago. And that was because of overuse and a tendency to shade out those desirable plants. So you see crimson clover there down at the bottom. I was driving down in Baldwin County last week and saw this beautiful stand of crimson clover in the median on the Baldwin Beach Express. And I called Earl Norton and I said, all right, you told me that crimson clover is a temporary plant. Why is this clover still blooming here in Baldwin County? And he explained to me that it is an annual plant. So the plant itself dies at the end of the season, but it's also a reseeding plant. So the plants that I was seeing, they were brand new. They emerged from seed from clover in the past. Not all clover is like that. Some clovers are truly perennial, but that's if you're curious like I was about seeing crimson clover on this list of temporary seeding, that's the explanation. So thank you, Earl, for clearing that up for me and for everybody else on this call. So sometimes as we're in that transition period, so say on this solar site, for example, we had to get the place stabilized as those permanent seeds would
We lost you as you started talking on that slide.
okay, thank you. So sometimes we get in this transition period between temporary seeding and permanent seed establishment that's a little bit confusing. And so on the solar facility site here, we had to get the site stabilized as quickly as possible. So in the wintertime, when we had to get it covered up, we put out temporary seed mix with some permanent species included. We put some unhulled Bermuda seed in there along with some Bahia grass. And so there, in theory, ryegrass dies out and the permanent seed it will come on through. But the problem here in Alabama is there's a little bit of overlap. So we kept watching in March, starting in March, we knew that if we were going to have to overseed or seed and stubble this area again, say our permanent species did not come through, we needed to do that in the March, April timeframe. But the problem is we couldn't get the ryegrass to die out fast enough to see if we were actually getting the emergence of the permanent species. And so we mowed it and we looked at it week after week after week. And eventually we started seeing some Bermuda starting to pop up. And it's hard to see, but these finer blades of grass, those down at the bottom are, that's Bermuda starting to pop up. And so we've still got the ryegrass, but we also permanent species were not coming through. And so we had to come in and basically had to start from scratch, excavate, not excavate, but scratch up the surface and reseed our permanent species. So we're going to talk about ground preparation next. But first of all, I think we have a pole EV slide. And I'm going to stop sharing, Mike Perez, and you take us through that. I think I just gave away the answer.
And Barry, as I'm transitioning over, would you just maybe highlight those last two photos you were showing? You were talking about having to go back in and re-scarify the ground, but you cut out momentarily there. So
okay.
Touch on
so in one area of that site, we were able to see the permanent vegetation coming up, and we thought we would be okay. In other areas of the site, there was no permanent vegetation coming up. So in order to reseed the permanent stuff, we had to go in and scarify and then plant. We did have a drill seeder, and we'll talk about that term. We did that on certain parts of the site, but in others, we just re-scarified and reapplied the permanent seeding.
Thanks, Barry. And so you should be able to see the question on Pole EV. Go ahead and refresh if you're not seeing it. The question is, at what stage of construction should we be establishing vegetation? So we have the options of establishing at the end of the project, just prior to our notice of termination, in early spring, as project grading is completed, or after the silt fence fails. And it looks like we've got 100% of respondents saying that it should be as project is being completed, which would be correct.
Awesome. Back on. Okay, so yeah, I hope all those points were driven home. Yes, early spring is an appropriate time to establish vegetation, but we can't wait all the time. It's not always easy or practical to wait around and wait for March to roll around before we can apply our permanent seeding. So we need to establish vegetation as quickly as possible. All right.
Barry, I saw a question come in. So Tracy's asking, how long can you store seed? When does it start to go bad? And when do you have to think about replacing the seed if it's been stored too long?
That's a great question, but I don't know the answer to that, honestly. Maybe Perry or Earl, if you could weigh into the chat box there, that would be helpful. Okay, hopefully we'll get you an answer to that, Tracy, soon. For some reason, I'm not seeing those questions in my chat box, but okay. I did see a comment from Earl that says temporary is an enemy. I do appreciate that. All right, so let's keep rolling. So again, we're fortunate in Alabama to have a great climate, pretty good soils for establishing vegetation. But if we want the species that we want and the time that we want in a way that lasts a long time into the future, we have to pay attention to the seed bed. We have to take a look at the types of soils that we're planting in, and this probably isn't the best photo to demonstrate what I'm talking about, but I just love the photo. It's a contractor establishing vegetation as they do their work. So it's grading, topsoil application, soil tracking, and immediate stabilization with vegetation as quickly as possible. And that topsoil we know is good topsoil, and because it's been sampled and tested, and that effort does pay off. We know that topsoil is typically less erodible than the subsoil, and you can see kind of in this area where we had stopped our topsoil application and our vegetation and establishment efforts. You can see the erosion there on the left side of the subsoil being on this project where we have ample amounts of topsoil. We use that topsoil as an erosion management practice. All right, so let's talk about soil. One of the reasons that topsoil can be less erosive than the subsoil is that it is an aggregate or a mix of different types and shapes and sizes of materials and particles, and there are rocks and roots and organic materials and sands and silts and clays. They're all kind of loosely bound together to create this aggregate that's typically more or less erosive than your subsoils. One thing I like about your soils is topsoil is typically not red in the coastal areas, and that's big, because when you get red water leaving your site, you know you're in trouble, and everyone can see it from miles away. Mike Perez and we're doing some work for the Nebraska DOT right now, and we're developing basically a construction stormwater manual for the DOT. And we've got all these great photos, and the DOT finally told us, hey, quit sending photos of red dirt. We don't have any of that out here. So we're struggling to try to find, going through all our hundreds of photos that we have, and most of them have red dirt in them. So let's talk about soil testing. Soil testing is always recommended, and to determine which nutrients are present and which nutrients are lacking. So you can take a sample of soil, send it to the local cooperative extension service, and they'll test that soil, and they'll tell you, based on what you're trying to grow there, they'll tell you, hey, you need so many pounds of nitrogen, so many pounds of phosphorus, so many pounds of potassium or potash. And so then you can go about getting your fertilizer. They'll also tell you the pH of that soil, and we may have to add some lime to address that. But you see this bag of fertilizer, you see the 10, 20, 10. We sometimes see a 13 or a 8, and what those numbers represent is 10% of that bag is nitrogen, pure nitrogen. 20% of that bag is pure phosphorus. 10% is pure potassium. And you can get fertilizer mixed at the local co-op, and if you want only nitrogen, they can mix you up some. You can actually buy some 3400 fertilizer, and what that means is the only nutrient in there is fertilizer, and only 34% of that bag is that particular macronutrient. And so nitrogen is good for leaf growth, phosphorus is good for the development of roots and flowers and seeds and fruit, and then your potassium, that produces a strong stem and helps with the movement of water in the plants, which also helps flowering and fruiting. So how do we calculate how much of this bag is actually beneficial to me? Well, similarly to the calculation for pure live seed, if we're looking for pure nutrient or pure macronutrient, we multiply the bulk of that bag times the percent of that nutrient. And so what that looks like, well, you tell me what that looks like. Got a question here. How many pounds of pure nutrients are in a 50-pound bag of this 10, 20, 10 fertilizer? So do that calculation for nitrogen, do that calculation for phosphorus, and do that calculation for potassium. All right, again, it should have taken you longer to get your calculator up than to do these, to do the math here. But if we're looking for pure nitrogen, we're only getting 5 pounds of this 50-pound bag is going to be pure nitrogen. So if your test result comes back and says you need 50 pounds of nitrogen, then you're going to need more than one bag, right? We're going to need about 10 bags because we're only getting 5 pounds of pure nitrogen out of this particular bag. But this particular bag also has 10 pounds of pure phosphorus in there, and then 5 pounds of pure potassium. So that brings up a question of, what do we do about this if we only needed 5, 5, and 5 pounds of each of those nutrients? What do we do about this bag providing us more than that? And I'll save that question until after you finish this math here. So how many 50-pound bags are required to provide 120 pounds of pure N, P, and K? So the ALDOT specs require 120 pounds of N, P, and K on every job all the time. And part of the reason for that is I think we used to have language like so many pounds of 888. Well, your contractor would show up with 13 or some other mix, and it was confusing our inspectors and sometimes confusing our contractors. And so we brought it back down to a basic, all right, every job, 120 pounds of pure NPK, and then we can do the math from there. Your contractor shows up with this bag, it's going to be a certain number of bags. Shows up with 13, that's a different number. And one question that typically comes up is, why does ALDOT do soil testing? Well, at ALDOT, we had been building roads and planting grass for a long time, and we were able to go back in our records and see what were the typical results of our soil testing. What were the recommendations coming back? And it was typically 120 pounds of fertilizer, pure fertilizer, and then 2 tons of lime per acre. All these numbers are per acre, I'm sorry. And so we decided that to simplify things, and at the risk of maybe over fertilizing in some areas and under fertilizing in other areas, the simplification and the cost benefits kind of outweighed. And so there's a simple requirement: 120 pounds of pure nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, and 2 tons of lime per acre. So do you have an answer to this question yet? All right. So how many 50-pound bags are required to provide 120 pounds of say nitrogen. Well, we know in 1 bag of nitrogen, we're only going to get 5 pounds of 1 bag of fertilizer, we're going to get 5 pounds of nitrogen. So 120 pounds is what we need. Divide that 5 pounds per bag into that 120 pounds. We need 24 bags of this particular fertilizer mix to get our nitrogen needs met. Does that meet the other needs? Well, it certainly meets the potassium because those are the same numbers. It also exceeds the number of pounds of phosphorus that we need. So if we buy 24 bags of this particular fertilizer mix, we're going to get 240 pounds of phosphorus. That's twice what we need. Is that a problem? Well, it may or may not be a problem. So what happens when we do have excess phosphorus in our runoff? Well, if we've already got an impaired water that's impaired because of phosphorus overloading, then that's a problem. That's a regulatory problem. We know that phosphorus, it feeds algae, it creates an oxygen deficit, and we know that that's a problem. So we do need to be mindful of wasting fertilizer. You know, it may just feel like an economic waste, but there could be environmental impacts to that overuse also. And you can get these mixed to exactly what you need, even if what you need leaves out 1 or 2 of these components or macronutrients. All right, so how do we decide? Are we going to seed or are we going to sod? We're getting to the how do we deliver now, and so once we get the soils right and a proper seed bed established, then we make some decisions regarding how the vegetation should be established. And so we have. I just realized we're running tight on time. I'm going to get on down the road. So making that decision between sodding and seeding is a real thing. It's a real it's an economic versus cost versus benefit analysis that we have to run through. Know that you can get sod any time of year. This photo was taken in January after this sediment basin was constructed. So benefits of sod: immediate stabilization, reduced regulatory and legal risk, reduced potential for rework, reduced potential for negative impacts. And there's some cost savings. If you apply solid sod, you don't have to worry about some of the other things that you might have to worry about if you seed. Sod's going to have to be watered. We need to take that into account. But so if we go with seeding, then how do we get to the proper application of seeding? And my preference is to let the contractor decide how he gets the seed on the ground. Have some performance standards that make that happen. There's several ways to apply seed. A traditional broadcast or cyclone type seeder. We can blow it out. So our mulch is another thing that we have to decide how we're going to apply the mulch. Here's traditional blown mulch with a guy standing on the back of on the mulch blower, blowing it where he wants. This particular piece of equipment, the guy driving the tractor is actually also controlling when the rolls go into the hopper and where the chute or where the gun is pointed. Here's a solar farm where they were able to flip that the chute underneath the panels to get a better coverage underneath. All mulch has to be secured in some way, either crimped or with a tackifier. Most of the time we see crimping in Alabama. Sometimes we don't have to have mulch. If we're planting into in an existing cover, we can do that with a drill seeder. And so this drill seeder punches a hole in the soil, basically puts an indentation in the soil, drops seed in that at a certain rate, and then kind of covers up and compacts on top and can provide a pretty good cover that way. Seed and mulch can be applied as a slurry through hydraulic application. Seed can be applied, mulch can be applied hydraulically, or they could be applied together. The tanks can be mounted on trucks or trailers or a Maruca there on the right. So which is better? Well, personally, I like dry blown mulch. I've had the opportunity several times to see those applied side by side. This particular solar farm is one example. We were doing it both ways, and after a while, the mulch, you start to lose the color, which is not a problem, but you also start to lose the mulch over time. You know, so this is the photo on this is the same area in both of these photos. The photo on the right is was taken last week, and that's a few weeks after it was first applied, and the mulch is all but gone. That's hydro mulch there. I have to think that if we had a 2-ton rate per acre, then some of that dry blown mulch would still be there. So hydraulically applied mulches they're considered an erosion control product, just like a rolled erosion control product. And rolled products, there's a lot of terminology out there, sometimes conflicting. Erosion control matting, erosion control blanket, turf reinforcement matting. I call them all rolled erosion control products, and then they're categorized based on what categorization you're using. It might be the Blue Book, it might be the Erosion Control Technology Council, or it might be ALDOT's system that you're using. I particularly like ALDOT's system because it's just logical. So a type S3 is intended for slopes with a 3-to-1 maximum slope. A C6 is intended for channel applications where the maximum anticipated shear stress is equal to or less than 6. And there's an easy calculation to get to that shear stress. And so I like the terminology and I like the classification of ALDOT, but you use whatever makes sense for you. So rolled and hydraulic erosion control products, they provide temporary cover and support, raindrop impact, seed protection. Once we get into the permanent root reinforcement, that's where those products are called the TRMs, or engineered armoring systems, and they're intended to reinforce the roots below the soil. They're manufacturer-specific requirements for installation, including check slots. This contractor had a pretty good little tool to create the check slot on the sides. I'm going to run through one quick thing here. We need to make sure that if we're using a TRM, that we put soil on top. There should be a soil or some type of infill, and then there should be soil on top, and then the grass grows in and through and under the matting. This is what happens if you don't. You've got this permanent mat sitting on top. It inhibits grass growth, and it's going to make it hard to grow grass and mow in that site. So Mike, I apologize for squeezing you on time, but I did. So I'm going to let you take it from there.
No problem. Thanks, Barry. So are you able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I wanted to just highlight some cost considerations and just compare the various options we have from a cost standpoint. And so some things you have to think about, these will be immediate and long-term objectives that you're trying to achieve. Think about the risk that your job site has to receiving waters. Think about the risk you may have to operation and maintenance tasks, and then also from a legal standpoint, what are the risks associated? You also want to think about the time frame that you're trying to establish vegetation. Think about the aesthetics that are required. Maybe that's to help sell the property, or maybe that's the owner requiring certain aesthetics. Think about the time frame for acceptance of the project or acceptance of the notice of termination, which may impact your choice of seeding options or sodding options. If you have sensitive receiving waters that you need to protect, and then other needs for immediately stabilizing the site. And so to give you some ideas, these are a range of costs. You're looking at the higher per acre costs would be for sites that are less than about 3 acres. And then when you get over 3 acres, the costs start to go down a bit. So for seeding, depending on your, as an average, you can expect to be paying about $800 to $1,200 per acre. Adding mulch on top of that would be $750 to $1,100 an acre. Sodding is going to get significantly more expensive. You're looking at for Bermuda, for larger areas, about $4.50 a square yard. For smaller areas, about $7.50 a square yard. And so that translates to about $20,000 to $36,000 per acre. And then your rolled erosion control product, your type S3 would be a lower grade, about $1.15 a square yard. Your type C8, which would be for higher shear stress protection, about $4.25 a square yard. So kind of quickly looking at an example here. If we got a 3-acre site on a 3-to-1 slope, remember, if we want to seed, you're looking at about $800, $1,200 an acre. So we can, let's take the average, about $1,000 an acre. You're looking at a $3,000 fee to seed that acre, or to seed those 3 acres. And then add in your mulch on top. You do 3 acres at $925, about $2,700 total. So between the seed and the mulch, you're looking at just under $6,000 for that 3-acre site. Now, if we compare that to adding a rolled erosion control product instead of using mulch, let's say we put that type S3, you're looking at almost $17,000 for that rolled erosion control product. So you've increased your cost significantly, and your total cost here for the 3-acre site would be about $20,000. And then the last option we have is we want a sod. And so 3 acres, which is equal to 14,520 square yards. If we take the average of that cost and call it $6 a square yard, you can see that your cost for sodding is about $87,000. So comparing those 3, you can see your cost goes up significantly. You know, a 3-acre site, $87,000 a sod can be a lot of money, especially if, you know, in some parts of rural Alabama, you're able to purchase an acre of land for $2,000. You know, that's your stabilization cost goes up significantly. And, you know, you compare that to just the acquisition cost, and there's a huge difference there. But, you know, the question becomes, is it worth it? You know, what if the receiving water downstream of your project is protected? What if it's a drinking water source? What if you don't get paid until the notice of termination is accepted by SEDIM? Or what if you don't get paid until the property sells? At that point, is it worth investing more in getting establishment a little bit sooner? What if there's an incentive in your contract? What if you can save $15,000 in time and materials? So, you know, there may be other benefits to getting the site stabilized and established quickly. So I wanted to wrap up by revisiting our learning objectives. And, you know, now that we've gone through this session together, you should be able to explain the function and the role of vegetation within the stormwater management plan, describe the state of practice for minimizing soil disturbance and preserving vegetation. And then you should be able to apply the principles and processes to design project phasing, preserve vegetation, and manage some topsoil on your site. And so as we wrap things up here, we do have some what we're calling a knowledge quiz. It's more of an opportunity for us to have some further discussion, but this will be done through Poll EV. And so you can go ahead and jump back on Poll EV and start answering some of these questions, and we'll kind of highlight these as we go. But first question is, should coastal areas have, or do coastal areas have more stringent requirements for managing construction stormwater? And as most of you are responding, yeah, that is true. We have the SARSA, CZARA, and we've got those regulations for Mobile and for Baldwin counties within the construction general permit. So 3 reasons to manage construction stormwater. We talked about the land, the blank, and the law. And that's right. Yep, it's the water. We talked about the 5 pillars. Let's see how many of you can organize the list here correctly. And so this is a little bit different on your phone. You have to drag these options around, but see if you can remember what the proper order is of the 5 pillars of construction stormwater management. And these are in the order of effectiveness. All right, yeah, and that is correct. So managing communication, managing work, managing water, managing erosion, and managing sediment in that order.
Nice work.
All right, so to learn more about managing construction stormwater, what are your options? You can reference the Blue Book or the Alabama Handbook, join the Alabama Stormwater Association, or attend the next 2 workshops in this series, or all of the above. And so that would be all of the above. So use the Blue Book as a reference, use ALDOT as a reference, join the Alabama Stormwater Association to put on great events. Today, they've got a session with SEDIM talking about the new changes to the permit, the construction general permit. So that'll be this afternoon. And then we do have 2 more workshops in this series. We'll be talking about 3 practices: sediment barriers, inlet protection, and construction exit pads. That'll be on Friday at the same time, 9 o'clock. And then next week, we'll have a session on sediment basins. So please join us for those 2 as well. And we're running up against the end of our time, but if you do have questions, you can use the chat box, or you can submit questions through Poll EV, and Barry and I will hang around and help answer those as they come up. But I want to thank you all for joining us today. As a reminder, you can access these slides through the link that's provided there at bit.ly/BCSWCD. And Barry and I will see you on Friday.
Hey, Mike and Barry, there was one question regarding how does the cost of hydraulic mulch compare?
It's typically, since when it first became a thing, it was more expensive as contractors started to purchase equipment. Now, just about any seeding contractor you deal with, they have their own hydro seeding unit, so they're not renting one. They don't have to worry about buying one, and they've got the one they have almost paid off now. So it is truly just a method for applying seed or applying mulch, and I'm not seeing it particularly on areas where you have large areas that you're dealing with. The benefits of production kind of outweigh any costs that the contractor has. So I'm not seeing a difference in the application cost. It's a good question, though. Thank you. And I'll add also on that website where you're downloading the slides, there's also a fact sheet or a summary sheet of the 5 pillars of construction stormwater management that give you a little bit better explanation in writing of what you can do with those 5 pillars. So Mike Shelton, close us out.
Okay, well, I do always have to double check to see if I'm muted. I've gotten into that knee jerk there. So I do appreciate everybody sticking with us through through a little bit of the hiccups that we had. I want to thank Mike and Barry. They did a great job. Again, everybody take a look at that link there for downloading the information. If you do have any follow-up questions, please get those to us. That we'll do our best to get any answers back to you. And maybe if there's an opportunity to answer some questions, if you're participating in the next 2 events, that's great. I do want to make sure everyone sees the survey link there that I put in the chat. I noticed that some responses have come in. And let's see, yes, we will put we'll go ahead and put the slides in the chat. If one of you guys could do that, that'd be great. The link to the slides in the chat, that would be, that's good. Again, if you have any questions, send them over and we'll get them answered at some point, and somebody will get back in touch with you with the answer. And unless there are any additional questions or any comments, I do want to thank again Barry and Mike for their great effort. Thanks to Laura Smith at Baldwin County Soil and Water Conservation District for also helping out with hosting the event. And we will see those of you on Friday who have signed up, and if not, we'll see you some other time. If you do have any great suggestions for trainings in the future, let us know. Either put that in the evaluation or email it to me or Laura or Mike or Barry, and we'll get those going, and see if we can't host the kinds of things that our decision makers need immediately. So thanks again, and from then on, we'll see you again sometime.